welcome to today's Supply Chain Leadership webinar series. Today is Building a Roadmap to Adopt SAP Integrated Business Planning, or IBP. My name is Dan Lutner. I'm a Business Development Manager here at Spinnaker, and I'm happy for all of you that have joined us today. Thank you for taking time out. First things first, this session will be recorded and it's available to view afterwards in our private LinkedIn group. So if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, please use the little chat box there on the left-hand side of your screen. And also, if the PowerPoint looks small to you, you can make it full screen by clicking on the drop-down arrow right above the title of the presentation in the upper left-hand corner of the presentation box. Before we get too far into IBP, a little bit about Spinnaker and what we do. We've been around since 2002. And Spinnaker is a boutique supply chain management consulting firm that specializes in both forward and reverse supply chain. We're a little bit unique in the marketplace in that we have both the capabilities of a traditional management consulting firm, but we've also got our roots set in technology implementation and systems integration. The team that's presenting today is from our SAP practice. That group is a preferred partner to SAP for the implementation and optimization of supply chain modules. Traditionally, the APO suite would have been where we specialized, and we're recently aligned with their cloud-based solutions, including the HANA solution and the topic of the day, which is IBP. Future webinars, so that you know, will be on other topics, including general planning and functional alignment. So keep an eye out for future invitations if you're interested in attending those. Your presenters today have about 45 years of combined experience in both consulting and industry. Sunil Sanghani leads the SAP consulting team. He's a specialist in supply chain transformation projects as well as system implementation. Fun fact, he did the first handful of IBP implementations to be deployed, so he's an authority on the issue. Jet Baird is a senior manager with Spinnaker's practice. He's a functional consultant, and he specializes in the alignment of business requirements to IT projects, as well as the design, configuration, and implementation of APO and ECC functionality, which enables supply chain planning and execution. And on the topic today, before we start too far into it, it's important to first discuss the separation of IBP, the process, from IBP to technology. And this is definitely a hot topic today. It's new from SAP, so you might have heard this before. But at Spinnaker, we define integrated business planning as probably stages 3 and 4 of that typical S&OP maturity curve. In our experience in these stages, we see firms that have moved from a reactive state of planning to a more proactive process, which extends outside of supply chain into more finance and management. The other definition of IBP is the software, which is the newest suite of planning applications from SAP. As we're going to discuss, IBP from SAP enables cloud-based planning capabilities in S&OP, as well as demand, supply, and inventory planning, and they help to facilitate a more mature, proactive, integrated business planning process. To get down into the meat of the presentation, I'm going to pass this over to Sunil to begin, and he'll talk a little bit about our goals for the session.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. The goals for this session, we hope to cover two primary areas. One is to share our point of view on both IBP as a process as well as SAP's IBP suite of applications, and really try to talk about what's really driving the need for innovation, and why is or how is SAP IBP different, and why should you consider SAP IBP. Jeff will actually talk about how you adopt SAP IBP, what goes into prioritizing some of the business challenges, and then how do you construct a roadmap that's driven by your business challenges, as well as considering your existing application landscape. So go to the next slide. So let's start with really understanding what's driving the need for innovation. And we call it innovation for multiple reasons. If you look at some of the big headlines over the past few years, it's very clear that supply chain was at the heart of each of these headlines, and plus many more. be it consumer products where the margins are shrinking, to disruptions in your supply chain. Example, the ports shut down on the West Coast, where companies like McDonald's ended up flying French fries over to Japan, or even your massive recalls from GM in the automotive industry. I mean, it's very clear that in addition to achieving their existing targets and goals, planning for disruptions has become the norm, I guess, in the environment that we currently exist. So, companies clearly need to adopt improvement capabilities that not just help them achieve their objectives, but also plan for such uneventful disruptions. If you go to the next slide. So when we actually look at today's realities, right, and some of these have been around for a while, quite frankly. So, our customers are increasingly demanding. Specifically when you look at CPG or pharmaceutical industry, they expect the product to be at the right place at the right time. We have, in a global supply chain, the market conditions are extremely challenging. You're faced with global, regional, local competitions. And as your supply chain grows, so does the challenges with functional silos and effective collaboration, I should say lack of effective collaboration across those functions. So collaboration becomes a key component of an effective supply chain. And then also from a technology perspective, companies have invested millions in adopting SAP, both on the transactional side as well as on the planning side. But the reality is, in some of those companies, the planners still continue to use Excel. And what's interesting is that when companies go through such implementations, they compromise on the change management aspect of what it takes to make or leverage those investments that they make in applications such as SAP. So when you look at those realities and what's really required to significantly improve capabilities, one of the key things, or some of the key things that we're seeing today is the technology has evolved quite a bit. The collaboration, the bringing the functional silos, I guess, together to talk to each other and collaborate has become a key function, or almost a key requirement, in order to counter some of those realities, right? Also, when you look at your integrated business planning, right, a lot of companies had implemented S&OP processes which were very reactive as opposed to proactive. And today's technologies, including IBP, enables that culture to be more proactive than reactive. Balancing critical resources is very important as well. So looking at people, capacity, working capital, these are some of the core metrics that help you kind of measure where you are in terms of your performance. And then finally, in order to achieve some of those objectives, it's important to clearly identify what your internal capability goals are and how you're going to achieve them. If you go to the next slide. So this is Spinnaker's planning framework. And what's important is that even though some of these processes are separate or independent, making them work together enables to create a world-class planning framework. So when we look at your traditional demand and supply planning, you may notice some of these boxes there. We've also added some other boxes which kind of constitute the IBP framework, right? So when you look at financial integration, or when you look at scenario modeling or scenario analysis or executive reviews, they're all part of the core IBP framework. Next slide. So What's existing today is that the APS systems, or the advanced planning systems such as APO, traditionally focus on, kind of the core planning components, right? Demand and supply planning specifically. However, the current APS systems have gaps whereby they don't extend their capability to include some of the more advanced planning concepts, things like scenario analysis, financial analysis, enabling the internal and external collaboration. And that's where SAP's IBP product comes into play. IBP is really constructed to take full advantages of an existing APS or an APO system and extend the functionality to include some of those newer capabilities which are required to counter some of those realities that we just talked about. Okay. Next slide. So what is SAP's IBP product, and why is it different? So the key components, I guess, for IBP are as follows. So IBP includes an application called the control tower. Really, the objective of the control tower is to provide visibility to your end-to-end supply chain. And it's primarily done through making metrics available to the planners. So, for example, if you are a planner on the supply side, then you would identify and make visible to you your key metrics, so that when you actually log on to the control tower, you have the ability to drill down and resolve issues. And that's what the control tower essentially does. It makes the metrics available and visible to you, and then it helps you focus in the areas that truly require focus, right? And then you drill down and resolve some of those issues. So control tower is something that was out there in the form of Excel spreadsheets and so forth. I mean, companies like McKinsey and other management consulting firms stress the importance of control towers. So what SAP's done is essentially taken that and built an application around it. The second one is the sales and operations planning application. This is what I would call kind of the heart of IBP. It essentially integrates with your APO or an advanced planning system, as well as your financial planning system and other ERP systems or ECC systems if you have ECC in place. And the objective of SNOP is really to bring those cross-functional processes and integrate them and make them effective so that your planners can collaborate across those different functions. What's interesting about SNOP is it's essentially going after the same data as, for example, as APO does, i.e. forecast, capacity, etc. However, it kind of brings it all together and allows the planners to do all kinds of what-if analysis, scenario modeling, so that they can make some more proactive decisions as opposed to being reactive to an issue and so forth. So SNOP is widely used. It was one of the first applications that was released by SAP a couple of years ago, and it's very mature. Some of the other applications that SAP has recently released include demand, supply, and inventory. The functionality within each of these applications is starting to mature. Demand currently has demand sensing, but SAP plans to include your traditional forecasting functionality as part of demand over time. Supply has your traditional heuristics and optimization capabilities. And then inventory is primarily focused on inventory optimization across your supply chain. Interestingly, Response is an application that's not currently available. SAP is forecasting that this application will be ready for general availability sometime in Q4 of 2015. So what's different with this suite of applications? Well, a couple of things. One is it is based on the HANA platform. So I'm sure you all have heard of HANA. Faster, scalable platform, which SAP is clearly leveraging for all its future application products. It is a cloud-based solution currently. So SAP is offering this on the cloud. However, it intends to also provide clients with an on-premise solution later this year. It does have a common data model across each of these applications. So when you integrate this with your APO or your ECC systems, it essentially extends the master data and as well as the transactional data that you use in each of those applications into IBP. And then finally, it's fully integrated with both your planning as well as your execution systems. Okay? Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about S&OP. I mentioned earlier that S&OP is by far the most mature application, and quite frankly, it has been widely adopted by many companies. I know of at least a half a dozen CPG companies that have been through a pilot implementation of S&OP and currently are they've embarked on a roadmap whereby they're extending the core functionality to different functional areas. So the way the best way to look at this is, there's literally 3 entry points for you to consider in terms of how you can leverage the S&OP application. If your challenges are in the supply chain space, highlighted in blue, you can use this application to help facilitate your demand and or supply consensus process. The functionality within the S&OP solution allows the planners to do the scenario modeling, which I talked about earlier. It provides the social collaboration aspect. So if you truly have a global S&OP process or even a regional S&OP process, it allows your planners to collaborate within the solution itself. And then also it provides real-time analytics so that your planners can create multiple models, get consensus on a model, and then convert that plan into a more tactical execution plan. Supply chain by far is the most common entry point for some of these companies. Finance is another area by which companies tend to adopt the solution. So either you're using Hyperion or BPC for your financial planning function. This solution essentially takes your revenue plans and allows that integrated consensus process between finance and supply chain. So internally, you can agree on a single number. This is extremely useful in cases where your supply chain is extremely volatile. So for example, I know of a client in automotive where if you've ever worked in the automotive industry and you're working with the OEMs like Ford and GM, your demand volatility is extremely high. I mean, extremely volatile. In a single month, they may change, their plans from, 4 million cars to, 2.5 million. So if you're a tier 1 supplier and you've committed to buying all this capacity, you're setting aside a significant amount of working capital, and that's where a solution like this helps you understand the volatility associated on the supply chain side and how that impacts the financials. On the sales side, it's interesting because we worked with a couple of companies. One of them was they sell headphones and home theater equipment globally, a very well-known brand. And their challenge was, how do you consolidate sales forecast across multiple regions? So they ended up using the solution to begin with to collect their sales forecast from their sales force, which initially, I believe the initial implementation had about 150 users or so. And then they leveraged the solution to drive the sales consensus process. So again, you can start off in any one of these 3 areas, and most companies end up expanding into some of those other areas. Okay, next slide. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jeff. Jeff will talk more about the maturity of each of these applications, and then how do you prioritize your business challenges so that you can build an effective roadmap. Jeff?
All right, thanks, Sunil. Appreciate that. The slide you're looking at here really begins to lay out where are we at within the framework of the IBP solution. So what you're seeing here is our interpretation of where we feel each of these modules are in their ability to be delivered by SAP. And again, we want to remind you, that SAP fully admits today that they're not at 100% functionality with these modules. They continue to add and update the functionality in each of these modules. So as you look at this, don't think immediately that they're never going to do anything to make it better. We just wanted to give you our perspective on where we think each of the modules are today, and as we know, they're moving forward constantly to try and fulfill that. So to do this, we want to look back a little bit at the journey of where they've been. And when you think about where SAP was with this, they started by acquiring SmartOps back in 2012. And that really was their start to trying to be able to provide an S&OP solution in the space that was being filled by some of the other advanced planning systems. So that S&OP tool, as Sunil mentioned, is pretty strong already. And they've branded it now with the IBP piece of this to bring along all of the S&OP portions from SmartOps, along with some additional connectivity now into these other IBP applications. So as you can see, S&OP we've got up there at a pretty high confidence right now that's a great place to start your roadmap, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. A couple of the other places where we're pretty strong and feeling that the tool is ready to go is on the control tower space. As Sunil spoke, this is really that high-level overview. You can call it your dashboard, your cockpit, all those acronyms that are used to be able to have that one view of where you're at within the organization. And Control Tower really starts to do that by bringing together your inventory, your sales, your forecast, your finances, all into one view that you can look at and then drill from that top-down view in. The demand tool really is in its infancy in the IBP solution. The primary reason for that is most of the clients today that we've seen have APO installed already, so their APO solution for demand is pretty strong. The major difference that this demand solution adds is the ability really to have the demand sensing components that haven't been there before. And as you can see from its infancy here, it's also the most recent release of tools from the SAP suite, and the fact that it only came out this quarter to be worked. Another point on that is from the APO standpoint, SAP has announced in the SAP Insider conferences a couple weeks ago that they're going to continue support on APO through 2025. So most clients out there were scared that they had to immediately move to IBP, that they had to get moving on the front of getting off of APO and moving to IBP, and really SAP has kind of squelched some of that by saying they're going to continue to support the APO products through 2025. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't want to start on a roadmap to IBP with some of these other pieces. It's just that in that demand space, there may be a good reason and a logical place for that to be at the end of our roadmap of moving into IBP. You can see as well, inventory and supply are in pretty good shape as well from our aspect, and we believe that tool, both those tools are ready to go. And again, right, the whole thing is at the end of this, we really want to be able to extend our supply chain collaboration and our financial optimization by bringing all these tools together. So as we move on to the next slide, where do we feed this data from, and how can we get IBP really filled up, and so that we fill that gray box in there with the data that IBP needs to be able to execute. And that really can be filled from a couple of places. As you can see in this example, we've used SAP's APO. That doesn't mean that it has to be SAP's APO solution that you're coming from in order to be able to use IBP. You may be looking at some other advanced planning systems or have them already implemented in your organization. The IBP tool interfaces with those applications, so it's not a end-of-the-road solution that you have to go to APO to get to IBP. But as you can see, when we use the APO solution here, you can see that our demand planning piece, our component from APO and demand planning, is really going to fill that S&OP forecast and supply plan in the IBP tool. Our supply network planning components, again, are going to go into the supply components within IBP. Our PPDS could be part of our inventory components, as well as being part of optimizing our inventory levels and all those components that go into supply. And then finally, if we're using global ATP out of the APO suite, we could be bringing that data into Control Tower for our order visibility. But again, I want to remind you that it doesn't have to be APO. It can be other APS solutions out there, and bringing those together and deciding when and where to move forward is all part of that transition that you need to make, and building that roadmap of how do I get to IBP and how do I build this kind of picture for my organization. So as we move on to the next slide, there's really some things that we have to do to be ready to transition. There's a lot of key considerations, and that's where we like to step in and help you in prioritizing your challenges. What's really happening in your organization today? Is this being driven by IT saying we want to go to a cloud solution like IBP, or is this being driven by a business need, as Sunil mentioned earlier, where we want to get better visibility of our supply chain? We have to then assess where we're at within our process maturity. Do we have existing processes within the organization that we can continue to use, or do we need to look at the ability maybe to put processes in and adapt new processes to conform to the SAP IBP environment? So we need to look at all those things as we're building a roadmap. We want to look at our current technology. Are we at a point in time where it's ready to retire our current technology and we want to move to the cloud platform? Or is it a place where we're at, where our company has always said at the upper levels that we're going to keep everything within our environment and we don't want our data out on the cloud? So do we need to now look at what does that mean to be purchasing new IT hardware? Do we need to be bringing in new skill sets? All of those kind of questions are things that we can help you with as you build that roadmap. Then another thing you have to do is consider where are your users at today and how good are they going to be at being able to accept this kind of change. We've got a client we're working with currently right now that we're doing that for them within their distribution centers. We're going out and evaluating exactly how prepared are their people to be able to take on something new like an APO or an IBP? Can the people withstand the change that's going to come, or what gaps do they need to be able to move them forward? And then finally, part of this transition is building that cross-functional support. This can't be just an IT project. This can't be just a business project. It really has to be a project that's taken on across all of the organizations. And as Sunil showed earlier, there's entry points in finance and sales and supply. But again, those are the entry points. Once you begin to take on the project, you then need to be able to bring all of those people together and get consensus across the cross-functional team. And again, a couple things to remember here, as I said earlier, APO is going to be around until 2025, so there's no reason to rush into doing this. And finally, IBP is new. Some of the applications are more mature than others, and that's what we showed you in that Harvey Ball piece before. So as we move on to the next slide, what is it really that IBP can do for you? And this is really where, as an organization, you need to step in to start building that roadmap and deciding what are going to be those key wins. What are going to be the things within my organization that are going to get IBP accepted within the organization to move forward? And some of those things you want to look at are some short-term gains. It may be around the S&OP process automation. As Sunil mentioned, today, you may have a organization that's doing S&OP on spreadsheets, and there may be 3 or 4 or 5 iterations of those spreadsheets before you're able to have even one S&OP meeting. And this automation really allows the ability, by integrating this with APO or your other planning systems, to get out of that place. So you get a nice short-term win. You may be today not having a field forecast. You may be getting a sales forecast on spreadsheets, or you may not be even incorporating a sales forecast. By implementing this S&OP process, you have the ability to integrate that kind of data in. And again, another short-term win could be just supply chain visibility. You may not know today where your inventory really is, how much you have invested in working capital, how many days of coverage do you really have of products across the globe. Are you able to answer those questions today? If not, Control Tower may be the quick and easy way to go to get you started in the IBP world and get moving forward through the scope of bringing on the other IBP solutions later. And then you may look at some of those intermediate and long-term things. Do we really need the tools we have today? You know, are we looking at this as a, hey, let's replace all of our existing systems and get on one platform, because that's what we're hearing from the C-level organization is we want to be on one platform. We don't want different planning tools from our execution tools, from our S&OP tools. We want to be in one place. This may be an opportunity from an intermediate or long-term to do that. So again, the idea here is to start small and scale fast. We want to take that first bite, get a taste of what IBP really is, and then be ready to move with a platform that's in place to expand into all the other modules as it makes sense within the organization. So let's take a look at what would it look like in an actual organization. And as we move to the next slide, we're going to use this as an example of a company that today may have, you know, their own PPDS in some form. They may have a demand planning in some form, and they may have a supply network planning existing piece. And that's what we're looking at across the bottom here. So that they may have those existing and are happy with everything they have. So their first step may really be to look at this and say, you know what, we just need to bring S&OP in and connect it to our existing PPDS, our demand planning, and our supply network planning. It's really pretty easy to do that. The prerequisites to doing that are having an S&OP process in place. The organization is ready to do it, and cross-functionally we've got support for that. So again, if there's, you know, this is the company that has S&OP done already today on Excel spreadsheets, and this is a nice first step for them to be able to get into the IBP solution. Moving forward, they may want to then add Control Tower to that. Now that we've seen that S&OP works, I'm okay with this idea of a cloud because we've decided to go with the cloud version of S&OP. My C-level is okay that we're not, you know, violating any of our company policies by having that data out on the cloud. Let's now look at bringing in Control Tower. And again, you can see when you bring in Control Tower, you're really not messing with any of the existing APS again. You've left all of those pieces in place. But you have some other additional prerequisites here, some knowledge of some Excel-type pivot tables, because Control Tower really is going to drive that data when you're going down through the chain. It's really going to drive that data to a place where you may want to look at it in an Excel format and an Excel pivot table. And then finally, you want to be able to map your entire supply chain at this point, because Control Tower is a look across the entire organization. So if we've, you know, if companies are already looked at doing global ATP, they understand what goes into looking at that, this may be a great starting entry point for them as well to bring in Control Tower. And then as you move through time and you move on, you may be able to then add the demand, supply, and inventory components to the solution. By that, we may take them out of our existing APS world and put them into the IBP world. So we, again, maybe want to leave just our PPDS off in our existing environment and integrate those other components in. Well, when we start doing that, there's some other things that we need to do before we get to that step, and that's these prerequisites of, you know, we really need to do some demand segmentation. We need to do some production constraints and know what our abilities are, what our inventory constraints are, and what are the impact of our customer service levels. So again, as you look at that, this is one example of a company that, you know, could start with S&OP, add Control Tower, and then continue on into the other environments. It's not really a big bang. It's taking that first bite and then moving quickly. So as we move on to the next slide, you'll see really this kind of all those pieces and parts play back into what Sunil showed you before. You know, each of these components in blue here are areas where IBP has the ability to provide a solution for you. And it's really a decision within your organization as you're starting to build that roadmap. It really is a decision of which of these Lego block pieces are we going to start putting together and connecting as we start to move through this full process. So again, it's really starting from how receptive are we in each of these areas to are we ready to take on this change within our organization, from both a people, process, technology standpoint, and can we then connect these pieces together in a way that makes sense and that we're making the most use of the dollar spend that we're using when we go into an IBP type solution. As we move on to the next slide, right, how do we really develop that roadmap and where do we get with that roadmap? Really, we've got to start from the current state. We've got to understand where we're at today. So we've got to go in and do an analysis of where we are today. Are our people ready? Is our processes ready? Do we have technology in place to handle this? Have we set up the policies and metrics around all of these things we need? And those are the 5 lenses that we really like to apply to each of these 4 areas that you see across the top. So you're looking at your current state and understanding people, process, technology, policies, and metrics around where are we at today. Then from where we're at today, what's our gap to getting to best practice? How do I move from an organization that is maybe in the middle rung to an organization that's at the top rung? What are those things that I need to do? And then we start looking at that future state design and what kind of processes do we need to be able to get to that high level? What kind of technology do we need? Is there some solution architecting that we need to do around our data and our organization to get it into a form that will allow us to deliver at the highest level that we talked about within the S&OP constraints? And then finally, hopefully at the end of all this, we were able to put that roadmap together. We know where we are. We know where we want to be. We have an idea of what that future is going to look like, and then we want to put that roadmap together to define really where are we at from a recommended business release. How are we going to do that? What are we going to move to put pieces in place so that we can get these key outputs? And really those key outputs from the roadmap that we really want to be able to understand are what should you implement, when should we do it, and why should we do it? This isn't, again, just a decision made within one of the pieces of the silo. This is across the entire organization. And then what are the outputs, what are the impacts on our people, our process, our metrics, and our policies? What improvements do we have to make to do that? And then finally, and probably most importantly, what are the cost-benefit analysis pieces of this roadmap that are going to make it sense for us at the C-level when they start asking me, why am I spending this kind of money? Here's the cost and benefit analysis for each of those, and here's where we're going to see those across the roadmap. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of the IBP solution, where we're at, and what we think the tools provide for you, and then finally a little bit of an insight into how to develop that roadmap and look forward to what those key outputs can be from that roadmap. And at this point, Dan, I'll turn it over to you for any questions or answers.
Sure, thanks, Jeff, and thank you, Sunil, as well. It's definitely a buzzworthy topic. I think we hear a lot about IBP, the technology, but I definitely think it's important what you said there, Jeff, about taking that holistic approach, looking at the process and the people aspect, but also the policies and metrics. That's interesting. I want to open up to everyone that's in the room that hasn't yet submitted questions. I have a couple here already that I'll shoot over to you guys. I think the first question here might be one for Jeff, but Sunil, feel free to answer. Someone here wrote, my company has APO, and it's their opinion that IBP requires a different IT skill set. And is that true? What do you think about that?
No, it's not really. That's not a true statement. The fact that where the differences are is the fact that a lot of the APO solutions are on-site solutions. So in a lot of cases, you really do have your own IT staff that is maybe doing your ABAP type programming, things like that. But if you move to an IBP type solution, you're going to be moving probably more to the cloud-based solution. And in essence, kind of think of the fact that you're renting or leasing, the IBP piece of the solution from SAP. So you won't need the skill sets that you have today in order to modify IBP, because you won't be doing that. You'll be feeding IBP data, but the skills of being able to get the data to IBP are still the same that you have today in the APO world. You just probably won't need as much or as many of those.
Okay, great, thanks. Another question came in. Sunil, I think you talked a little bit about the different entry points for getting started with IBP. Maybe you can elaborate. The question is, in your experience, where have the early adopters started on the IBP roadmap?
Sure, Dan. I think I may have mentioned this, that what we've seen, most of the early adopters have focused primarily in the supply chain area. And this is primarily because it has been kind of marketed as a supply chain solution, one. But two is it's very appealing to those companies that has implemented an advanced planning solution like APO. As I mentioned earlier, that APO is very good at what it does when it comes to demand and supply planning. But in order to achieve world-class planning, you have to look at those processes in a much more integrated, effective way. So the capabilities that IBP provides clearly complements what's available in APO. So we see a lot of our clients and a lot of companies actually start on the supply chain side, but at the end, it's really driven by where your challenges are and how you choose to prioritize some of those.
Good point. I just flipped on our contact information for anybody here that would like to get in touch with any of us after the presentation. If you have questions that you haven't thought of or didn't want to ask in a group setting, feel free to call or email any of the three of us, Neil, Jeff, or myself. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. This is more of a technical one. Maybe, Jeff, you want this. Are there any plans within IBP to enhance the demand portion before giving up support of APO?
And I think I covered that a little bit, but let me just go a little bit more into that, right? Yes, there are. Like I said, they really are in their infancy of releasing this, and their primary goal in releasing the demand IBP piece was to get the demand sensing portion out there. I think what you'll see is more and more of the APO pieces of demand layered into IBP as time goes on, because the thought is a lot of customers are already on APO and they already know and understand that, and those customers that are going to be coming in without the SAP APO piece right now probably are doing it someplace else and can bring it in. So I think as time goes on, definitely you will see an improvement in the demand tool, to a point that it'll look probably almost exactly like APO does today as they layer those pieces in.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for this session. I want to be respectful of everybody's schedules. So to those of you who are attending from outside of the company, thanks again for spending an hour with us. Find us on LinkedIn. This presentation will be shared there in our LinkedIn group. Feel free to connect with any of us if you've got questions, and look for future invitations on other topics in supply chain planning. So thank you again, everybody, and have a great afternoon.